Hey there, gang. How you doing? I hope you're hanging in there all right. Things around here are a little bit different these days for obvious reasons. Like every single one of my professional musician friends is now out of work, and in some cases they're hurting pretty badly, to be honest. Like there's not enough money for food, let alone guitar repair. So it's scary. It's a scary time all around. I've just been plugging along, working my way through the backlog here, getting to some of these bigger jobs that have been waiting for a little while. It poses an interesting question for the video production, though, because oftentimes the long jobs I'm waiting for lacquer to cure and things like that. Ordinarily, I'd be working on a mix of short and long. I kind of stack them together. It's like Tetris some days, using up the time wisely. But for video production, it's not all that easy to sort of crank them out and turn them around, because I'm trying to keep you guys entertained and put stuff out as often as I can. I was actually toying with the idea of maybe doing a marathon next week or the week after, where I'll take one of these and I will break it up into smaller segments, maybe put up a video every day or every other day, and that way you can follow along almost in real time, and we could go a little bit more in depth into each part of the procedure. I don't know, does that sound good to you guys? Sound like fun? So this is a Martin D-18, but it's a little bit special. This is a custom shop job. It's got an abalone rosette ring here, which you would not see in your standard D-18. It's not very old. It's only about a 2014, but it's got quite a lot of playware for that age. The owner here, he's got a pretty heavy hand, and he's a very vigorous strummer. There's a lot of pickwear going on, scratches and scuffs, and there's a big ding in the finish down here. It's the kind of guy who plays them hard and puts them away wet. Literally in this case, actually, there's a bunch of spatter here that's kind of suspect looking, which we will take care of in quick order. There's actually quite a lot of work to do here. This is going to keep me busy for a little while. One of the first orders of business will be to take care of some side splits here. He tried to effect some repairs himself using some super glue. He used a medium viscosity stuff, and I'm not sure he got full penetration. It actually looks worse than it is. Like these ones here, they seem to be pretty firm. I can level these and we can polish this up and it'll look better. This one, however, definitely opened up again, and it needs a cleat on the inside. We'll get rid of this and we'll re-glue that. You can see some significant play wear going on down at this end of the board, but for whatever reason his B string is a real monster. It's just burning through those frets. We're down more than halfway through the thickness of the fret. Frets 1, 2, 3, 4, and even getting into 5 up here. So we're going to do a partial refret on these, take these out, put new ones in, and do some crowning work. There's a funny condition happening here in the tuners that I've never seen before. 5 of them are just fine. They're in pristine condition, but the 6th has this weird corrosion thing going on. You can see it on the capstan screw, the worm, and one, but not the other of the mounting screws. It's pretty deeply rusted. I don't know, did this one go on a saltwater fishing expedition and leave the others at home? Why would it cause that kind of corrosion on only one of them? Anyway, we will try to clean that up. So this last one's going to raise a few eyebrows, but I want you to remember that this is not your guitar. You're not paying for the repairs, and therefore you don't get much of a say in it, okay? There is a crack that's formed along the line of the bridge pin holes here. And this can happen for a number of different reasons. Usually it's humidity related, though sometimes you can also get a piece of ebony that's really squirrely. It'll crack no matter what you do. Sometimes you can have bridge pins that are a little bit too snug in their holes, and over the winter the bridge will shrink up a bit and the pressure mounts and it's enough to pop open a grain line. Regardless, it's there. I said I could probably fix it with some thin super glue and some sanding dust, but he didn't like that idea. He's had other bridges fail on him in the past. I know I recently re-glued a bridge that was lifting on one of his other guitars. And he said, I just want you to replace it. Take it off and put a new one on. And it doesn't have to be ebony, For the longest time, D-18s were shipped with rosewood bridges, and there's a certain segment of the population who actually appreciates that sound more. Rosewood and mahogany as a combination rather than ebony. It's not that it's better, it's just a different kind of sound. It's tonally subtle differences, but people like it. So I said, okay, what do you want? And he said, well, Brazilian would be nice. And I said, I don't have any pieces big enough for this anymore, and I'm not really interested in going through the black market to try and get it. And he said, Cocobolo? I said, Cocobolo is beautiful. I've made a couple of guitars from it. I don't really like it for bridges because it's got a very waxy character to it. It exudes this resin that's very oily, and you can wash it down with acetone to degrease it, but it always seems to come back. I've seen a lot of Cocobolo glue joints fail over the years, so it's not my preference for bridge. I said I have another tropical exotic that might be good. It has some of the character of Brazilian. I've been using it for a couple of years now and I really like the way it sounds. So we're going to give that a shot. Using the razor blade scraper trick with the cellophane tape on either side to act as a depth stop, just to knock down the heavy accumulation of cyanoacrylate glue here. Just block sanding with some 1000 grit paper here. Because this crack here, the one that opened up again, wasn't level when it was glued. The glue kind of pooled along one side of it and not the other. I can't really level it. I would sand right through into the bare wood. I don't want to do that if I don't have to. I'm just going to try to crack some of that away. Someone asked me the other day why I don't just use super glue for all my crack repairs. Why I usually use wood glue first on the wood and then go back afterwards and fill in the finish with the super glue on top. And it's because the super glue is so brittle when it cures, and it doesn't really create the kind of molecular bond that you get with the wood glue. Like, the two surfaces don't seem to meet the same way. The intimacy of contact isn't there, put it that way. That it can crack open again in a way that regular wood glue doesn't do. So that's why I usually use Titebond or hide glue or fish glue. It just seems to be a better, longer lasting glue joint. It's less likely to break open again. Okay, so I basically cut the crack open again. It's the only way I'm going to get it level. I don't know why, but these sides feel very, very thin to me. I have no way of measuring that, but just the way it gives under the thumb, it feels like it's less than 2 millimeters. It feels like some of the flamenco guitars I've worked on before by Spanish makers. They tend to go really thin on the sides in a way that I'm not used to in American-made factory guitars. These magnets are pretty powerful. I'll just use this one spool clamp here in the center to provide a little bit more pressure. Hold it together while it dries. And there we have it. 3 little cleats. I lost the footage of me pulling out the frets. This is a bound fretboard. It's got ebony binding, so cleaning out the fret slots takes a while. I'll use the fret bender to roll a radius onto some wire and then cut that off to length. This is a fret tang nipper, which removes the tang and lets it overhang the binding. I'll fill the slots with some glue and seat that using the old-fashioned hammer method, which still works just fine. I'll trim off the excess, making sure those little pieces don't hang around on the bench where they might do damage later to some unsuspecting guitar. This piece of tape here just to protect the edge of the fingerboard, which already has a little bit of wear, but I thought might as well be careful. And we'll soften the corners on the frets, make them nice to touch. We'll do some leveling and some crowning, then some sanding and polishing. Time to remove the bridge, so I'll use my little silicone heat blanket here. The piece of wood on top not only holds it down, but it gives me some indication of how hot it's getting, because it's about the same thickness as the bridge. This took an awful lot of work. It really did not want to come off, this bridge. Folks, at this point in my life, I've taken off a lot of bridges. And I gotta say, it's never a predictable enterprise. Some of them, they just slide right off there as if they've been dipped in butter. Others, and it's not the ones you think are going to be trouble, but they will fight you every single inch of the way. And this was definitely a fighter. I'm happy it came off as cleanly as it did. Actually, the bottom of the bridge took more of a beating than the top would, which is really nice when that happens. But we can use this as a discussion. Just looking here, one of the things we really like about Martin is that they're very fastidious about scribing around their bridge and cutting the lacquer right up to that outline. So it's contacting all the way along. Very good glue bonds. They don't come up very frequently. They're very clean about their glue ups. Other manufacturers don't do that. Some of them will let the lacquer, they'll leave an outline around the perimeter, and the bridge will be sitting on top of that. The responsible ones will make a relief cut around the bridge so that there's still good contact between the bottom and the top. The cheap imports don't do that at all. Like, you'll just have the bridge sitting on that lacquer and you're relying on, epoxy that's been gummed up underneath there. Those bridges tend to fail pretty quickly. Now then, having this nice clean outline means that the bridge is sitting down inside a trough, basically. And you've somehow got to get a palette knife down and under to separate it from the top wood. That can be hindered by a number of things. Just feeling the thickness of the coating of the lacquer on this guitar, it feels thicker to me than usual. Like, it's thicker than I would normally spray on my own guitar. Oftentimes I will mask off for the bridge so I have less scraping to do. I'll shoot my lacquer coats on, then I'll take my micrometer or my calipers and I'll measure the thickness of the tape with the accumulated lacquer, and I can tell how much is on there. It's usually around 0.04 of an inch. That feels safe to me. This feels a little bit heavy, so it's almost like that trough effect has been amplified a little bit. So getting that knife in and under was a struggle. The other thing about this bridge is that the wood in here has been cut perfectly flat sawn. Now, here's an illustration. Here's a piece of rosewood. This is actually the opposite. This is a quarter sawn piece of wood. For those of you who don't know, the grain lines are cut so that they run perpendicular to the base. They run it right, roughly 90 degrees to this flat base here. In this case, the bridge has been oriented in this direction. So those grain lines are running parallel to the top. They're running through this way. And that makes it doubly hard to get a palette knife in there. Not only am I trying to get down and under, but if I happen to get in and touch one of those grain lines and get the knife blade in there, it just wants to follow that grain line and go right into the wood. It sinks in, at which point it's difficult. I have to back out and try to get under it again. Not easy. And that's what happened on this bridge. In a couple of places along the front here, the knife got in and started cutting into the bridge. It just followed a grain line. So I had to stop and go attack it from the other side, which is risky business and not easy. So it managed to come off though. This reminds me of a question I saw in one of my other videos recently, in which I had installed a bridge pad. For those who don't know that, that's the counterpart to the bridge. It goes on the inside of the guitar, counteracts the pressure, and it provides a solid point for the ball ends of the strings to pull up hard against, so they're not going to be chewing into the softwood top. It's a hardwood piece that that's under here. And I didn't really want to answer them in the comment section. I've seen bridge plates that were flat sawn crack. I've seen them quarter sawn crack. In this case, we've got a perfectly flat sawn bridge which managed to crack between the bridge pin holes. So, I mean, if there was ever a case where this should not have happened, it did, and it does. I've seen that happen to, flat sawn bridges, quarter sawn bridges, rift sawn. It doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. And perhaps the fact that this bridge was flat sawn, it cracked not in spite of that, but because of that. As you think about a bridge, quarter sawn wood is dimensionally very stable in this direction. It doesn't move nearly as much as either rift sawn or flat sawn material. So in this case, if you were to take this bridge in the middle of summer, manufacture this guitar, drill the bridge pin holes, and ream them out so that they were a nice snug fit. Most luthiers are this way. We really baby those holes. We make sure that it's a perfect fit. We ream them so that it's just about ready, and then we have to give it a little push so it pops out. Well, if you do that to a flat sawn bridge in the summertime, when the wood is at its, most hydrated, let's say, and I know we all strive to have really careful humidity controls in our shops, and we all want it to be 45%. Real world situations, it's not. Sometimes the wood itself can be, not as seasoned as we think it is. Maybe it's held on to more moisture. Like ebony will take a long time to give up its moisture. It's very dense wood. But if we do that in the summertime, and things start to shrink seasonally, by the time it's winter, it can be a real struggle to pull these things out. And if we want to put the strings in, sometimes you have to push it to get it to stick. Not a great idea. So I would say if you're a builder, be careful with that. Don't make your bridge pin holes too tight. As a repair guy, I almost want to see them on the loose side rather than too tight. They should just sort of fit there. Like the strings are not going to fall out. You shouldn't have to push. If you have to pull hard to get your bridge pins out, there's probably a problem. So that's one of the reasons I like using quarter saw material for both bridges and bridge plates. Now on the bridge plates, I'll oftentimes angle it slightly in relation to the bridge pin holes, so that's not one grain line running all the way across. It's broken up, it's on a bias. But it makes more sense to me to have something that's dimensionally stable here. That's not going to move very much in this dimension. Let's talk about materials here for a bit. For steel string guitars, I like East Indian rosewood. You know, there's nothing unexpected about it. People know what it sounds like. It's very familiar. Over the years, we've all agreed that it makes a good bridge. So, yeah, no problem there. Actually, for my classical guitars, I've moved away from rosewoods completely, and I've been using European pear wood, which I will then dye to make look like rosewood, so the classical players, who tend to be pretty conservative, won't get freaked out. But I find it works better for me. I get more volume out of it, and for the nylon strings, it just has a different kind of quickness of response, which I like. I don't know how it would function in a steel string capacity, though. Brazilian would be nice, but like I say, I'm not going to go buying it at this point. However, I found this wood, which I have really been enjoying, and which, to my mind, feels and sounds an awful lot like Brazilian. This is Chechen wood, which is a Caribbean material. Various countries, Dominican, Belize, Cuba. Metopium browniae, I think is the Latin pronunciation. It's very similar. It's got, you know, listen to this. It's got that sort of clinkiness that feels like Brazilian. It's got this sort of glassy, very lively sound that just feels like Brazilian to me. And it's got a color, and actually when it's cut like this quarter sawn, it looks quite like quarter sawn cut Brazilian used to. We don't see quarter cut Brazilian very much these days. Sort of a light chocolate color. Actually, just for comparison's sake, I'll give that a shot with the Indian rosewood. Quite different. So replicating a Martin bridge for a repair, well, making something that looks like a Martin bridge is not that hard, but doing it really accurately so it's going to fit in the same outline, not that easy. Martin has a series of operations that they perform, and I can figure those out. Doing something in the factory is not going to work the same way as it will for the repair. Take this radius that's at the back of the bridge here. It curves off. Now, in a factory situation, it's easiest to do that while things are still rectilinear. You get a belt sander, this kind of motion. No problem. However, because I'm going to be working to this very specific outline, I can't do it while it's a rectangle. I've got this radius on the bottom to contend with. Much more difficult. That means that probably has to come later in the process than it would in the factory. Other things like, when do we do the radius here that defines the cheeks? Or we know that the top of the Martin bridge isn't flat. We also know we have to get bridge pin holes in there, and it's much more accurate to drill those into a flat surface than try and, you know, put a bit down on something that's curved. We also have the wings to consider. Martin's always got a really nice crisp takeoff here between where the end of the wing is and the radius of the top of the bridge. And I can tell by the character on the end that that was done after the radius was put on the back edge of the bridge. And of course, in a factory situation, that's pretty easy to do while things are still a rectangle. If this is my sanding drum, this is a fence, take my rectangle of wood, I push those in there, and I make the cut I want. I can flip it over, do the same thing. Trying to do that with this bridge after I've cut out the perimeter is not so easy. The first side, no problem. The other side, when I flip it over, I'm contending with that radius. Now I can probably fudge that by being very careful, removing it, checking it, sanding a bit more, and gradually working my way up to the line and trying to keep that perpendicular to the front edge of the bridge, but it's nowhere near as easy. So in Martin's procedure, the outline of the back of the bridge would be the very last thing cut, and that gives us this nice confluence of curves that blend into each other, very crisp, almost geometric forms. And that's not the kind of thing you're going to notice if you're looking at the bridge from the top. But if you're the kind of person who will, you know, check things out from the side and from the back of the guitar, that stuff starts to matter. So it really depends on how anal retentive you want to be and the pains you're going to go to actually replicate that kind of thing. because it takes an awful lot of time. Okay, marking out for bridge pin holes. I've planed this blank to the correct thickness. I'm measuring off this one. Martin, back in the day, I think in their factory, used 3 different widths or thicknesses of bridge. They had 5/16, 11/32, or a full 3/8 of an inch. And I believe they did that just in case they got a little bit off in their next set. They can just swap out for the bridge that worked best for whatever the guitar happened to end up with. So I've marked that out, and now I'm about to set up the bridge pin holes. It's really tempting to use this bridge as a template. Just stick it in place there with some double-sided tape, grab a drill bit, and just drill down through these holes. But you got to remember that these things here are tapered. And the drill bit really only fits properly on the very inner edge, usually. So they don't make great bushings. Things can flop around a little bit there, and you can get offline. You could grab a grain line or something. Say, for instance, I'm off by 1/2 millimeter on this side of the first hole and 1/2 millimeter on this side. In other words, I'm a full millimeter off at that point, and that's a big deal when it comes to string spacing. So resist the temptation. I actually have to measure this out and mark it. I've set out a center line on the bridge just to make sure that things are centered. In this case it is. Sometimes they're not. Like I've mentioned this in previous videos, Martin can be, wildly irregular in their sort of symmetricality. Actually, look at this bridge here. You can see that the saddle slot in this case, next to the sanded portion here where the wing ends, is about 4 millimeters on this side. And on this side, it's around 5.5. This is a perfectly modern bridge. It's not something that was done by hand in the 1930s. So, there are eccentricities. So it does help to measure things out here. And checking out the string spacing, it's best, of course, to use the inside again because these holes can be slightly eccentric and they're tapered. So do you guys know the trick for figuring out the center points on string spacing where you've got bridge pin holes? I mean, rather than just trying to put your ruler in the center and kind of guesstimate. If you take it and you slide it over to the edge of the first hole, you can then read where the rule is on the edge of your last hole. And that is going to be the same measurement as the center points of those circles, assuming that the hole diameter is the same. Very, very helpful. In this case, we're about 55.5 millimeters, which is about 2 3/16 of. And now I can use an awl to give myself a pinprick there in the center of each line. Be a place to guide my brad point drill bit. Okay, some more tricks. I'm going to be drilling the holes using a 3/16 inch brad point bit, as I mentioned. So it's got a little central spur there. And I set it up. I don't actually use the fence. I just brace one corner of the bridge against it, and then with the machine turned off, I find center using the spur of the brad point. This, for some reason, gives me more accurate placement than trying to match it against the fence. Doesn't wander as far. So I'll turn it on, drill the hole. Here's the other thing. I don't go all the way through the bridge. I've set the stop on the machine so that it doesn't go all the way through the bottom. And the reason I do that is eventually I'm going to want to shape the bottom of this bridge so that it matches the radius on the top. And if there are holes there, when I come along with my card scraper, it bumps against those holes, and it's just like potholes, like little ruts in the road. And they keep getting worse and worse as you try to scrape. They get in the way and make it a longer process than it needs to be. So what I'll do is I'll drill half the hole here, get the thing glued onto the guitar, then I'll finish it off while it's in place. You know what, guys? I'm switching it up. As I was mentioning how difficult it is to carve the back edge of a Martin bridge and make it look right, and I realized I've done that twice in my life. That's probably enough. I'm making a template. And this thing is going to be 1 pencil width wider than the original bridge, but I can live with that. I'm just marking out for the curve on the back edge of the bridge here. This varied in different eras. Like in the 1930s, it was more rounded. It came all the way up to the back of the bridge pin holes. Modern ones start about 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters away from them. Do the bulk of it with a hand plane. Finish it off on the sander. I made a little radius sanding block here for the top of the bridge. It's 20-inch radius, and in order that I don't have to fight my way down to where it should be sanding, I'm removing some facets on the edges here in the wing area, being careful not to go down below the eventual depth that it should be. I'll smooth and refine things with a scraper. I'm just refreshing my memory that it is in fact a 2-inch diameter sanding drum for this operation here to get the radius, and it is. It's important to note that the sanding drum is turning away from the fence, so my finger isn't going to get pulled inside there if I happen to touch it, but it also just works better for sanding in this direction. I'm using a scraper to get rid of the sanding scratches from the drum. Don't sand the transition point between the top and the wing with anything coarser than about 600 grit. It should remain sharp. And at this point I'm chamfering the bridge pin holes. I'm going to trace around the outline for the back of the bridge. This lets me carve away the excess material so I won't have to route it off. And I'll glue that onto the template. I'm experienced, my fingers are away from the bit, and I'm being very careful, okay? This is a very light cut. I'll refine the transition area where the belly meets the wings and make sure the curves are all working the way they're supposed to. And then a couple of coats of Danish oil. The bottom of the bridge is protected with plastic packing tape so the oil doesn't get on there. And we'll check this out and see what it's like compared to the ebony, which was 32 grams. This is 30 grams. I'll scribe around the new outline here, that extra pencil width's worth. Do not cut into the spruce, only score the lacquer. You'll have big problems later on if you cut into the wood. And I'll scrape away that little remnant. I spent some quality time with various abrasives and solvents to clean up the corrosion that was on the tuner. This is Bowshield T9, which is an anti-rust and lubricating compound used in the airline industry. It's pretty good stuff. I'll level and polish and hand buff the repairs. Before I took off the old bridge, I made sure to check out the intonation, saw that I liked it, and so I made very careful note of the saddle placement so I could duplicate it. Okay, it's all strung up, ready to go. Got these on there. These are D'Addario nickel bronze. We'll see what those sound like. That crack and those glue spots look an awful lot better. The frets turned out pretty clean. Okay, I want you guys to recognize the fact that I sacrificed a fresh set of strings just so you can hear the difference between this bridge and the new one.